If you'll take your seat, we'll get started with our last session. We fully understand that the only thing between you and the reception and something cool and refreshing to drink is 3 speakers and me. So we're not going to delay this any longer. We've had a great lineup of speakers today, and we've got 3 more before we wrap up. I'm Dale Green, and I'll moderate this afternoon's session. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 3rd general session of the conference. During this session, our speakers are going to focus on forest health and productivity. We have 3 speakers. I'll introduce each of them and then let them in order take the podium, and then at the end we'll try to save about 15 minutes for questions. So in order for Georgia to continue to lead in the production of southern yellow pine, our landowners have to take a serious approach to increasing forest productivity while maintaining forest health. And this session is going to take a strong look at some important threats to our working forest, as well as advancements in seedling productivity. The bios are in the program. I won't go over those in detail. You can do that on your own. First up, we're going to hear from Dr. David Dickens. He's a professor of forest productivity in our outreach faculty at the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources, and he's based out of Statesboro, Georgia. And David has done a lot of work looking at pine productivity with different genetic lines. After him, we'll hear from Brittany Barnes. Brittany's a research coordinator with the Warnell School, and she's also our yoga instructor at lunch. We're supposed to tell interesting topics about people. David's a big biker, and I'm not driving a hog, but a bicycle. And Chip's got one of those classic names for somebody in forestry, right? Green's one, but Chip's another one. So we'll let it go at that. But anyway, Brittany is going to update us on some recent research on a variety of things, including, I think, sudden pine decline, and there are a lot of questions about that. And there have been some different views on that, and she'll touch on those. And then Chip, he's the Forest Health Coordinator with the Georgia Forestry Commission, and he's going to touch on a couple of invasive species and forest insect topics during his comments. So without further ado, we'll let David kick us off here.
Good afternoon. I'm going to talk about pine productivity and emphasize pine genetic gain that we've seen over the last approximately 60 years across the southeast. Current status, loblolly pine, due to its commercial importance, the #1 southern pine for commercial importance, and has the largest native range of the 3 species that we commonly plant in Georgia, loblolly, longleaf, and slash pine. It's got the most genetic improvement, and that would make sense. It's got 3rd cycle generation open pollinated seedlings that are available. 4th generation has been started work on in 2013 up at NC State. We also have closed mass pollinated or mass closed pollinated seedlings where the mother tree is known and also the pollen is known to reduce genetic variability and enhance different traits that we're looking for: volume gain, stem form, lack of branchiness, and reduction of insects and disease. Slash is intermediate in its genetic gain. 2nd and 3rd generation seedlings are available, essentially open pollinated seedlings, and then longleaf has the least genetic gain of the 3 species that we commonly plant. There is some improved seedlings available, but ask the nurseries questions that will help you pick the specific species and genetics for your given sites. That's the best thing to do. Okay, genetic gains in loblolly pine. Looking at this graph, we're essentially comparing everything to unimproved wild collected seed currently, hoping maybe one day we can compare our current genetics to maybe 2nd gen across the board. For example, I'm not sure whether that will show up, but anyway, down at the bottom you'll see a height example, the unimproved at 14 feet at age 6. 2nd gen would have a 15% gain over the unimproved to be a little over 16 feet, just a minor gain. 3rd gen would be 18.2 feet. The MCP or CMP would be 19.6 feet. And that compared to the 3rd gen, which is widely available, would be a 7.7% gain. And then the clones, 20.2 feet, a 45% gain over the unimproved, but just an 11% gain over the third gen. And these will vary site to site, okay, due to a number of factors. Looking at the history of tree breeding, essentially you have three major steps: the breeding, the selection, and propagation, and it's come a long way in the last 60 years, okay? Today, we still have that circle, but we also have varietals or clones that are available, okay? The three major tree improvement co-ops that serve us in the southeastern U.S. are the Western Gulf Tree Improvement Co-op, the NC State Tree Improvement Co-op, and the University of Florida Tree Improvement Co-op. Without these and the nurseries supporting these co-ops, we would not see nearly the genetic gain that we have currently available to you all. So a lot to be thankful for with these co-ops and all the nurseries that fund these co-ops. Okay. This is out of our Slash Pine Symposium, written by Tim White, former professor and dean of the University of Florida, retired recently. This is showing you some of the parameters for slash pine in particular. Florida emphasizes slash pine genetic gain, NC State emphasizes loblolly, and then the Western Gulf at Texas A&M and with the Texas Forest Service, they work on both Western slash and Western loblolly. But this is an example. We're looking at volume gain is a big factor, and in slash pine we want to reduce those stem cankers as much as possible, and we do have some really good genetics today available with slash pine. Typical seed orchard. Open pollinated is on the left side of the screen, and controlled mass pollinated, or what some call mass closed pollinated, is on the right. The traditional is which is what we sell a lot of these days, open pollinated, where the mother tree is known. Okay, the female flowers are pollinated, but that pollen could come from a quarter mile away, and that's what a lot of seedlings have these days. Whereas the controlled mass pollinated, the mother tree is known, and pollen is actually inserted in bags in the flowers when they're receptive, and now you have more specific traits, better gains, and but they're going to cost more. Okay, so you have different cost structures. Clones or varietals, done a number of ways, specifically via stomatic embryogenesis, also by tissue culture or vegetative propagation. And each seedling is essentially the same genetic material. They're pretty much identical, okay? They're going to behave very close to the same to fertilization, herbicides, and other cultural practices. They're also the most expensive of the seedlings that we currently buy, okay? All right. Do we get the same result? This is a key question for landowners big and small. If I go out and buy open pollinateds for, let's say, 60 to 75 a thousand, MCP or CMPs are 160 to 220 a thousand, and varietals are maybe 350 or so, what am I getting? What's that extra benefit I'm getting? We put these trials in, and you're going to get a different result just about every time. So keep that in mind. Higher value seedlings, you want to make sure you're getting the best survival and the best growth. So in some instances, you're actually going to be doing more. You're probably going to be potentially doing some tip moth control. You may be doing chemical and mechanical treatments pre-plant. You may be doing herbaceous weed control. You may be doing some fertilization. So we don't simply put these higher genetics in the ground and then walk away. It just requires more inputs, okay? We generally want to put our best genetics on our best sites. That's where you're going to get the biggest gain compared to an open pollinated seedling, okay? This is a slide that shows you the large variation. If you just look at the circled numbers, this is from some work by Barry Shiver. It compares second-gen loblolly, open pollinated, to varietals in different locations and different genetics. And you can notice if you look at the D squared times height, we're looking at very small amounts on the left side of it to very large amounts on the right. And we saw timber potential at the very bottom. Again, very different amounts site by site, okay? This is a really good sheet to have. A number of nurseries are now carrying these. They're very valuable. They will give you a number of different parameters. For example, this particular one shows a performance rating for loblolly pine of 100% volume gain compared to unimproved seedlings by age 6, okay? Very good rust resistance grade of A, very good form grade of A as well. So if you can find these, they're going to be rather valuable in helping you decide what seedlings you want to purchase. But again, ask questions. Some of our side-by-side trials, I'll go into the first case. This is on a large landowner's property where we're looking at some different genetics of slash loblolly, predominantly loblolly. We're looking at open pollinated elite loblolly, open pollinated elite slash versus MCP slash versus MCP loblolly versus varietal loblolly, okay? Average height of the OP slash 2 years after planting is 6.2 feet. Good survival throughout. That was not a problem. Average defect was rather low, less than 10%, with low tip moth evidence. This is right next to it is a set of plots of loblolly. Average height was 6.4 feet, so 0.2 of a foot gain in 2 years. Average survival is good at 90%. Average defect is also less than 10%, but we're starting to get some tip moth damage evidence, okay? Now we're moving into AGM, that's mass closed pollinated, a little bit better height than the loblolly, but just 1/10 of a foot, okay? So you're going to start to see some differences even within the different mass closed pollinated and the varietals as well, okay? Moderate tip moth damage. All right, here's your AGV, that's a varietal, 127. Average height is now looking better, 7.4 feet. Average survival is a little over 90%. Average defect has gone from 10% down to 5%. What we're finding in a lot of the better MCPs or CMPs and the varietals is really, really low percent stem defect. And that's very, very important for growing saw timber. Moderate tip moth damage, though. So we got to be thinking about potential tip moth insecticide use in some of these stands. At this point, this one is now 15.6% greater height than the OP loblolly, so we're starting to see some benefit here. AGV 124, this is another varietal, 8.5 feet. Now we're at 32.8% greater height than the OP elite loblolly, so we're starting to get some really good height differences just through age 2 when we compare the OP loblolly to the different AGVs. But each one, as you can see, is different. AGV 105, 8 feet, good survival. Average percent defect is very low at less than 5%. 25% greater height than loblolly at age 2. Some really good performers here with the varietals versus the open pollinated. AGV 123 was the best through age 2 at 8.9. We are going to remeasure these trees every 2 to 3 years. We have 4 sets of plots, and they're going to be putting in more. These are large landowners. They want to know for themselves what is good and what's not good across their landscape, across their soil series. This one also had low tip moth evidence. So this is another benefit of this particular varietal. Okay, 39% greater height than the OP elite loblolly, so some pretty good benefit there. Second side-by-side trial at the Onion Farm below Reedsville. We've got another set of trials looking at loblolly. This is through 4 years. The OP elite loblolly had a mean diameter of 3.6 inches, 19.2 feet, 75% survival, so it's a decent. Could be a little bit better on the survival. Very low defect, less than 10% defect, okay? Looking at the MCP loblolly, they're mass closed pollinated. We go from open pollinated to mass closed pollinated. We go from 3.6 inches DBH to 4.2, 19.2 to 20.4 feet in height. And again, the survival was not as good as we were hoping for. But when it comes to comparing the OP elite to the MCP, we're looking at 17% greater diameter through 4 years and 6% greater height. When we look at volume index, that ends up being a little bit over 40% gain when it comes to volume index versus the open pollinated. So there's some benefit with the MCPs, and we will continue to follow this as well. The AGV 107 loblolly, there were problems with this one, and it's no longer available. Just remember, these varietals are going to behave very similarly to inputs, whether it's herbicides, fertilization, et cetera. In this case, we believe there were problems with the Mazapir and Alstar, and the whole study area was treated exactly the same. So, that was not good. Average diameter at 4 years was 2.7 inches, much lower than the OP Elite and the MCP. Average height was 15.1 feet, and survival was a little bit over 50%. So this is an evolving situation with the varietals. All right, we're going to go to looking at some sites across the state. I think we did 425 miles this day. Mass closed pollinated loblolly up in Jenkins County. Marginal site. Remember, we're probably going to be putting these on our best sites. Very intensive management. Heavy dose of site prep with chemicals, machine planted through age 3. Good survival, very low defect. Again, that defect tends to be less than 5%. Average about 2-inch diameter and about 11 feet height. It'd be nice if they were side by side, but this is all just one large planting. Moving up to Wheeler County, they're very close to a sawmill, and he wants really good stem quality, and he's getting it with these seedlings. So the MCP is looking good here as well. Machine planted, about 5-inch average DBH and about 24 feet average height. Again, very low % defect. Okay. Varietal loblolly, this is up in the Crawfordville area. Good site quality. Intensive level of site prep. When you're using these seedlings, you do not want to skimp. And again, less than 5% defect with very, very good survival. Just doing some quick economics. Let's say we spend $75,000 for some good open pollinated loblolly. Okay, mass closed pollinated. Let's say we're going to spend $230. Varietals, we're going to spend $350, $1,000. Okay, this is where the money comes out of your pocket for an investment. Okay, trees per acre, we're going to plant 605. For the open pollinated, we're going to plant just 500 for the mass closed pollinated, which means we have to do a really good job with site prep to ensure maximum survival. The varietals, we're only going to plant 450. Okay, so there's your cost per acre in parentheses, a little over $45 per acre in the seedlings for the OPs, open pollinated, $115 an acre for the mass closed, and $157.5 for the for the varietal. Excuse me. So there's your cost difference, just under $70 difference between the open pollinated and mass closed, and then 112 and change between the varietal and the open pollinated. So we're comparing everything back to the open pollinated. So I'm going to use 5%, and I want to make 5% on that extra. I've got to grow X amount of dollars of extra wood to justify that extra cost at time 0. Okay, so essentially to 6962 has got to turn into $224.50 of extra wood by age 24, okay? Which means somewhere at $30 a ton for saw timber, and I know that some places are lower, some places are higher than that. The 3 sites I visited were all over the boards. One was upwards of 37 a ton for saw timber close to a mill. The other was as low as 23. So a lot of this goes back to local markets. Saw timber, mass closed pollinated has to produce 7.5 more tons of saw timber than the open pollinated. That's very doable. Okay, but just remember, it may not happen all the time. Okay, it's going to vary site to site, case by case. The 12 tons per acre extra saw timber is what we're going to have to produce with the varietals over the open pollinated. Okay. In summary, the nurseries and the genetic improvement co-ops deserve a lot of credit. We wouldn't be where we are now without them. They're producing some very high quality seedlings, and the genetic improvement that we've seen over the last 60 years has been tremendous. And without the co-ops, and we wouldn't have what we have today. So you need to thank the nurseries especially. Going back to the performance rating system, try to look at those as hard as you can. You're looking for both improved growth, improved form, less defect, and less insects and disease problems. And remember that your benefit is going to vary site to site and with changing inputs, herbicides, fertilization, and we can't overlook stand management. That's extremely important. Local markets are extremely important. Down the coastal counties, we've been getting extremely strong pulpwood prices. is there a large benefit with planting mass close pollinated or varietals versus some genetics that have very strong tonnage and volume traits, production? And with changes that may be important, the MCPs and varietals may become rather important with time. Each stand, in the end, is a function of a number of factors, including all the different management that we put in, land use history and soils, the species that you plant, and the genetics. So collectively, they're extremely important. Closing, just an example of how important management is. On the x-axis is the number of hardwoods at age 3. When you see less than 500 hardwood stems at age 3, look at your pine basal area. It's anywhere between 120 to 225, and that's where you want to be. If it's more than 1,000, your pine basal area is extremely low. So pine management is extremely important. The genetics are an important part of the picture, but this management is very important as well. Okay? Put the best genetics on the best site. Keep in mind local wood markets and the strengths of the markets. Generally, when you're using the better genetics, you're probably also going to have to spend some money on some other inputs, extra site prep potentially, maybe herbaceous weed control, maybe fertilization. And just remember that that higher input cost and the higher seedling cost only increases your cost. So keep that in mind. And we'll save the questions for later. You're welcome.